I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our second session regarding the behavior support rule. We have another great turnout today. We currently have 152 folks on with us. So a couple of housekeeping items. If you will, please, when you submit questions, and we encourage you to do so, if you will try to use the Q&A box, that will ensure that not only our presenters, but our handler of all questions, which is Rita Cooper, she will be able to see those as well. If you need to use the chat box, submit those to everyone, or at a very minimum to panelists. If you're participating and you don't see those questions come in, that's simply the settings of the system. But to ensure that our folks that are fielding those questions can see them, we really need those to come to the panelists, or easier even to everyone. And with that said, I am going to turn this over so folks can introduce themselves, and you have those names and voices together.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Terry Rogers. I'm the Chief Behavior Analyst for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And I welcome 163 of the smartest people in the state because you're here with us today. Lucas?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucas Evans. I'm the Central Area Behavior Analyst.
And Rita?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Rita Cooper, Western Region Area Behavior Analyst.
Okay, so Lucas and I are going to take turns so you don't be droned to death by one voice. I'm going to try to follow the plan that I made about which slides to change on. We'll see if I can manage to do that. And I'm so impressed that so many people are interested in this presentation. We went over a little bit last week because of the amount of questions, which is absolutely not a problem for me. It might happen again this time, and if it does and you need to log off, just please feel free to do that. The whole presentation and FAQs will be available on our website in about 48 hours. Is that right, Heike? Uh-oh. I caught Heike by surprise. Is that right?
You did catch me. I was fielding something else. So that is correct. We will have the recording of this session available within 48 hours on our website. As far as any follow-up documents, those will typically take a little bit longer, but we will make sure that you have the recording of this available.
Right. And so after this, we'll make an FAQ document, and then that will get posted as soon as we can get it posted. So again, we all encourage participation. We like questions. This is supposed to be the same one as last week. We already have a question and from Candy. You know, I never say everything the same exact way, but I should be following the slides. If you want to listen to it again, you're more than welcome to. If you listened last week, you probably got a good idea of what the rule is about, but we welcome you to listen again. So the behavior support rule 9 CSR 45-3.090 takes the place of the directive 4.200, or it might be 4.300. I've already lost the directive, which was the behavior support directive. So what I mean by takes the place is rule has a little bit more impact and power than just a directive. 4.300, thank you, Lucas. Rule applies to everyone who is serving people within the Division of Developmental Disabilities, so and has some enforcement capabilities also. So the rule is a little bit more important. There's not really very much changes other than now there are a few things we say you must do rather than we highly recommend or invite you to do. So that's the main changes, just a summary for you. And really, the rule isn't about anything other than best practice strategies for behavioral supports. And behavioral support should lead to greater independence and enhanced quality of life. So we're not asking people to do anything weird or unusual. We're asking people to follow best practice strategies and work to improve independence and quality of life. And that's what we wrote the rule to do. Oops, I already forgot how to move forward. There we are. So the objectives of this training are to inform all providers, regional staff, TCM entities, and individuals that the rule has been promulgated and applies to everyone, as I said. We're going to review what is mandated by this rule, inform you about prohibited practices, which haven't changed, but also just remind you about that. We're going to review the expectations for planning teams and the area behavior analysts and regional offices following this rule. We're going to provide information about the review process that support teams must complete when reactive strategy threshold is met for an individual. And we're going to review the role and function of the behavior support review committees. Those are our objectives for today.
And Carrie, this is Rita. We still haven't advanced the slide. So maybe on your side you have, but we haven't on our viewing side. Excellent. Thank you.
Oops. Okay, thank you. It looks like somebody's having some music. Heike, I don't know if you're seeing the chat box, but I can't control any of that stuff. I can only advance slides.
And I don't know where that music's coming from. I don't hear that, and our system isn't designed to play music. So I'm not sure that I can help with that. I'm only hearing that from one individual, though, so.
Okay, maybe log off and try logging back on. So what does this rule do? Well, rules are written for the majority of people, and usually rules are written not for the rule followers, but for those people who aren't sure what to do or wouldn't do what needs to be done without a rule. So that's something to keep in mind, because lots of people might say, well, I already do this, and I would say, yay, good for you, no problems, keep on going. But not everybody follows best practice, and so that's why there is a rule. And the rule describes the division's oversight of behavior supports. And so we do have oversight over behavior supports. We actually have to, based on the Medicaid waiver and CMS guidelines and rules. It establishes and describes the role and the function of the behavior support review committees. What this rule does, and these are the things that might surprise people, because before it was a directive, you might have not seen it as being quite as strong or insistent, but what this rule does now is establishes enhanced staffing as a restrictive support. Whether the enhanced staffing is for medical reasons or behavioral reasons, or because your roommate left and now you only have one person there, enhanced staffing or increased staffing ratios are a restrictive support. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. Restrictive does not mean prohibited. It just means it's not as independent as other supports, and that you have to do some things because you're using a restrictive support. The rule establishes that a plan must have prevention strategies and a safety crisis plan when it's needed, and establishes what is meant by needed. The rule establishes that you must have physical crisis management training if criteria are met. That reactive strategy threshold is established and what the provider is required to do when such a threshold is met, including review and make changes in the ISP. The rule establishes that documentation of positive interventions prior to modifications, and in place of modifications is a CMS word, Centers for Medicaid Services word. So we might think of it as restrictions or rights restrictions or restrictions. They consider those modifications in the plan, and what you're modifying is somebody's life as different from the rest of us. So if you think about it that way, you have to have positive interventions in place prior to adding modifications into somebody's individual support plan. You have to have regular data collection and review of that when you have modifications. It establishes what the requirements are for behavior support plans, including that they must be establishing alternative behaviors in the plan. They must have data collection, including antecedents, duration, consequences, and effect of these consequences. They must have support that shows progress towards independence and enhanced quality of life. So you can't just have a restrictive plan, you have to have a plan that's working towards the person towards independence and providing an enhanced quality of life. Something of note is that seclusion timeout will become a prohibited strategy starting July 1, 2021. It will also be identified as no longer able to be done in the waivers. So it will, and this is mainly because of CMS's requirements for timeout. And the rule establishes the Behavior Support Review Committee as a mandate when people are invited because of significantly challenging behaviors and or restrictive supports. And the committee establishes those criteria. So those are things that are a little bit different. In other words, it's not so much a choice anymore. You have to do this. The prohibited procedures are not different than they were before. They're also established in other rules. So these are just the same old prohibited procedures, but just to remind everybody of what they are. Mechanical restraints, and you might look at the rule to see the definition of what mechanical restraints are a prohibited procedure. In other words, you cannot do them. I should note here, as I did before, that we're going over some highlights of the rule here and some things that we really want to make sure that people have heard. But it's always a good idea to read the source yourself. So don't rely on my interpretation of it, but read the source yourself. So I strongly encourage you to find the rule. There's a link on our website, and go and read it yourself rather than just relying on this presentation. It's always a good idea. So I don't think I want to go through that too much because I'm anticipating questions, and this is a place we can save some time. We cannot use punishment, a punishment procedure for the convenience of staff or as a substitute for engagement or active treatment or behavioral services. You can't use law enforcement or emergency departments as part of that's something that's incorporated in the plan as the next step is call the police, for example. You would call the police just like you would when you would call the police for anybody, but you can't say, if he yells at you, call the police, for example. Reactive strategies cannot be administered by peers. Corporal punishment, enclosed cribs, and any other prohibited practices cannot be done. So I should have mentioned that we will have polling questions throughout this, and there's a couple of reasons for these polling questions. So the first and most important reason is that the information that we've presented has come across to you, and you're able to answer a question about it. In other words, it's a gauge of how well we've explained things up to this point. The other reason for the poll is to make sure that people are actually listening and not multitasking. So those of you that are answering your emails or writing a report or shopping on Amazon, you know, you'll be caught out here if you aren't paying attention. And so we want to make sure that our information is getting across. So Heike is going to put up the first polling question. Thank you. And we're going to give you 1 minute and 18 seconds to answer this question. Which of the following are prohibited in Missouri? And a few more seconds. Okay. So Rita, are you reviewing the answers here? All right, I will. We had 83 people not answer. That saddens my heart. Really would like everyone to participate so we can gauge how we're doing, as I said in the beginning, and make sure that we're getting our information across. So those 83 people that chose not to answer, please answer in the following questions. All of, which of these are prohibited? So any modification of a technique is prohibited. Mechanical restraints are prohibited. C is incorrect. So if you chose C, that's wrong. No one, not many people chose C, so good on you. Any strategy that might exacerbate a known medical or physical condition is prohibited, and any techniques that interfere with breathing. So if you answered anything other than C, you did great, and I appreciate your answering. And I believe that this is now Lucas's time.
All right, thank you. I am going to try to advance slides. Please let me know if you don't see it change. So just say mechanical restraints defined at the top. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So look, we're going to talk a little bit more about mechanical restraints. Again, this is the definition that's in the CSR. It's also the same definition that was in the directive. I'm going to go over it fairly quickly, but it's really just anytime you're using some sort of device, physical object to confine or limit somebody's freedom of movement and that they can't take off easily. And this is and has been a prohibited practice in home community-based settings for a very long time. One of the things that the CSR talks about is not just things that are considered mechanical restraints, but it also includes things that are not considered to be mechanical restraints. So anything that is used for medical support or postural support or some sort of physical aid that helps the person maintain proper balance and position in a seat or a bed is not considered to be mechanical restraint. Typical tie downs that you would use on, say, a wheelchair in a car when you're moving, that would be kind of similar to using a seatbelt for a person that's not in a wheelchair, are also not considered mechanical restraints. Seatbelt covers that, again, just add an extra layer of safety, also are not considered mechanical restraints. Some things that you might not immediately recognize that are considered or can be considered mechanical restraints are disabling of motorized wheelchairs. So if you have somebody who utilizes a motorized wheelchair and a staff person or another person disables it from the back and the person can't reach it to re-enable it, that's kind of like taking somebody's legs away from them, and that is considered to be mechanical restraint. Other things could include the use of door locks on a house. And this one is a little tricky in the sense that it's not every time you lock your door is that considered a mechanical restraint. So what we're saying is not that people shouldn't be able to lock their doors to keep people out of their house, because that's what a typical person should be able to do in the community. I keep my doors locked to keep people out. But what we're saying is that when doors are locked, to keep people inside their own home and the person can't easily or can't undo the lock, so they can't leave kind of when they choose, then it becomes something that looks a lot more like a mechanical restraint. So those are the examples that it covers. There are some other ones. If there are questions about them, we can pop that in the chat box and we'll cover them. But again, this is the same definition from the directive. And just to make the point perfectly clear, mechanical restraints have been prohibited and continue to be prohibited in home and community settings. So since I've just given you a whole bunch of examples, let's look at some examples and how have you determine whether you think these are mechanical restraints. So looking at this list, select the answer that best matches. So is A, B, C, D, all of them, or just B, C, and D examples of mechanical restraint? Okay, so it looks like more people responded this time than last time, so that's fantastic. Most people answered E, all of the above, and that is correct. We just talked about door locks. Taking crutches away, we didn't specifically talk about, but makes sense because you're basically taking away a person's ability to ambulate or to move on their own. We did talk about power mechanisms on wheelchairs and special seat belts on a wheelchair that can't be removed by an individual. All are examples of mechanical restraints. Good job. Hopefully, in the next question, we'll have even more responders. I really appreciate people participating. It helps us know that we're kind of getting this information across to you all since this is such important stuff. All right, so let's talk about something that tends to be kind of confusing for folks, and that is the difference and similarities between reactive strategies, restrictive interventions, and rights restrictions. So these are related. Sometimes when something happens, it falls into all three of these categories, but sometimes it doesn't. And what really matters is the context of every situation and recognizing that restrictive intervention is a CMS term and definition, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. But we're going to go through each one of these categories and how they overlap and are separate. All right, so reactive strategies, let's start there. So anytime you're doing something in response to a behavioral challenge or a dangerous situation, you're reacting to it, you're using a reactive strategy. So this is when you're doing something to create immediate or short-term changes in a situation to kind of address a situation that puts other people at risk. This could include things like blocking and physical restraints. It could also include things that aren't happening immediately but are more delayed, such as a person losing access to a location or a community area or having increased levels of supervision. So it's any time you're doing something in response to a challenging situation rather than doing something prior to prevent it. So even de-escalating somebody or using verbal de-escalation strategies or using empathy statements, anytime you're doing something in response with the goal of to try to remediate that situation, you're engaging in a reactive strategy. So things to think about when trying to figure out, is what I'm doing a reactive strategy? Again, I'm going to say this another time just because I really want to make sure people understand. If you're doing something in response, reactive, you're doing something in response, you're engaging in a reactive strategy. If you're trying to do something to bring about an immediate change in the environment, the situation, or the person's behavior, so for example, help a situation become safe again, you are doing a reactive strategy. Okay, so I've went through a lot of examples. I went through the things to think about to determine if something is a reactive strategy. Ask yourself if any or all of these are responses to an undesirable situation or an undesirable behavior. So this is a select as many as apply. So take a minute to do that right now.
Lucas, are you going to tell us the answers?
I can't see the answers. It says the poll's ended, but I don't see the responses.
Oh, okay. Well,
there they
are.
come. All righty. All right, so about the same number of people answered as last time, so good. It looks like most people identified each one of these as a reactive strategy. So let's kind of go through them and talk a little bit about why they are doing something in response. So if you're validating somebody's feelings during a challenging situation, you're reacting to that challenging situation. You're engaging in a reactive strategy. If you are familiar with tools of choice, you know that stay close hot is the tool that you use in response to undesirable situations to de-escalate them and prevent them from becoming crises. If you are moving breakables out of an area following some challenging situation that's happened, you're reacting to that situation. You're engaging in a reactive strategy. If you're blocking someone from going to traffic, you're reacting. It's a reactive strategy. If you're asking people to leave the room following challenging situations, so you can see that every one of these things are in response to something that happened before that's challenging, and thus is a reactive strategy. I also want to mention that I noticed we've had several questions about mechanical restraints. I'm going to hold those until we get through these next couple of slides, and then we'll circle back around to those. All right, so we've talked about reactive strategies. Now let's talk about restrictive interventions. So if the thing that you're doing limits the person's movement, limits their ability to access other individuals, restricts activities that they can engage in, it restricts their ability to use or have or get near personal objects, then you're engaging in a restrictive intervention. If you're doing something that limits somebody's rights, you're using a restrictive intervention. And anytime you're employing aversive methods, which as you remember that the use of most aversive methods are prohibited, but if you can respond interactionally with coercion, and which would be an aversive method, and that also would be could be a reactive strategy that might be restrictive. So let me say that again because I got a little messy. So when you're doing something that limits somebody's ability to access things or areas or people, then you're using a restrictive intervention. So another set of questions. So looking at these, which ones do you think limit somebody's right to move around freely, to access things that they own or would like to access, their individual rights as a person, or are aversive and coercive?
And even though it says you have 5 minutes, we'll probably just give you about a minute. I think we'll have all the responses we need. We'll stop it before then.
All right, thank you so much, Heike. All right, so it looks like most people didn't think that validating angry feelings or using steak feels hot was a restrictive intervention. You are right. That would be reactive, but that wouldn't be a restrictive intervention. Interestingly enough, most people also thought that only providing choice of outings from a limited list was a restrictive intervention, which I would have guessed people may have debated that a little bit, because I could see it kind of either ways depending on the context, but the other ones are clear restrictive intervention. So if you're only allowing people to go places where there isn't food, then you're limiting their ability to access food. Exclusion timeout is one of those things that is prohibited unless pre-approved and is definitely a restrictive intervention. If people can't access their clothing or can't smoke unless it's on a schedule, or can't get access to cigarettes unless a staff person gets it for them, or they can't go to public areas of their house, those are all restrictive interventions. Now, limited choices of outings from a list typically would be a restrictive intervention unless it's, say, based on the context. So for example, if I go to a train station and I want to select a destination, I have the choice of whatever other stations that train stops at. I don't have an unlimited list. So that one's really more context specific, but I'm glad you all picked out that these are probably restrictive interventions, except for G, which is really just about reacting to a situation and not limiting people's rights. So the final thing we're going to talk about is rights restrictions. So this is when we decide that some limitation of any general liberty that's available to all of us by virtue of being a U.S. citizen, anytime we decide that one of those rights needs to be limited, such as the ability to move around freely, the ability to have choices, the ability to communicate with other people in whatever form that might be, whether that be the internet, via mail, telephone, in person, or if we think that their ability to engage in leisure activities or to have their own property, keep their own clothes, keep their own money, go to different places of their own house or their community. Anytime we are saying that some right that a typical person would experience needs to be limited or curtailed or narrowed, we're using a rights restriction or a rights limitation. And no matter what, we always have to treat the person with respect and dignity and act within what would make the least restrictive environment for the person. So we're going to have one more round of questions, and then we're going to recap, and then I will cover some of the questions. So ask yourself, which of these are rights restrictions? We're going to take a minute, and we're going to go over them.
Did the polling questions pop up?
Yes, I see them.
Okay.
There are about 40 seconds left.
All right, good.
All right, the poll is closed, and we'll have results in just a moment. Okay, so it looks like most people identified that each one of these is an example of a rights restriction, though it looks like a few people consider exclusion timeout and behavior to be a rights restriction. And one of the things that I think it's important to recognize is even during this window of time period when exclusion timeout can be approved and implemented under the supervision of behavior services, it would still be considered a rights limitation for the person. It would just be an approved rights limitation. And that covers the different categories, but let's kind of put them together. So here's the thing to think about when looking at what's happening. So if you're doing something in response you're engaging in reactive strategy. If you think that somebody's rights need to be limited, that's a rights restriction. And then when you do something about that, you're engaging in a restrictive intervention. And we're going to be talking specifically about when you do something in response to a problem situation that restricts somebody's rights. That's what we talk about when we talk about our reactive strategy threshold in a moment. And then also, hopefully everybody's aware, but restrictions, rights limitations, those things don't mean prohibited. They don't mean you can't ever limit somebody's rights. What it means is that you have limited somebody's rights, and we have to afford the person due process. There is a procedure that has to be followed, such as the reason for the limitation has to be justified. So you've got to have a for real, reasonable reason for why you are limiting the person's right. You have to have, as Dr. Rogers mentioned, a way to track the use of the limitation of that right. You'll have to have what you're going to teach the person or how you're going to plan to fade out the use of that rights limitation, and eventually what the criteria are for the restoration of the rights. Those are all things that have to be in place in order to limit somebody's rights within our setting. And that's true for any rights limitations, not just those around challenging behavior. Now, questions specifically related to mechanical restraints. Oh, well, we have one. Jamie asks, please discuss guardians' rights to enforce a rights restriction. I'm happy to answer that one. Dr. Rogers, do you want to cover that one?
So a guardian has the right to enforce whatever the guardian can legally enforce when they're the person doing the actions of enforcing. A guardian doesn't have a right to have a provider enforce it if it is contrary to what would be the team feels is best for the individual or medically necessary, or if their guardian's asking you on July 2nd to put in a timeout program, they don't have a right to do that. So if it's against the law, they could, if they were supporting the person in their own home and not getting paid for it, certainly do it. If Medicaid's paying for it, we have to follow the Medicaid rules. So the guardian can say, no, I absolutely don't want them to have cigarettes. Unfortunately, the rest of us have the right to smoke ourselves to death. And so restricting that right would require us to go through all the due process and all that kind of stuff. And if ultimately it was determined by the team to be worse for the person to not smoke than it was to smoke, we'd have to try to convince the guardian to change their mind, or you might have to say, I'm sorry, enforcing this is just not possible within my organization. So it's a qualified maybe. How's that? Maybe, depending on circumstances. There's not much that's black and white in our world. So it depends on who's doing the actions of enforcing would be my short answer.
Thank you. And then we also had a question about if a person needs one-on-one staffing because of a medical need, and some examples are giving as bolting and seizures, how would we document that as a needed restrictive support? So I think the easiest answer, just generally speaking, is anytime you have a restrictive support or any modification in the plan, it has to be justified. So you would document that modification to the person's life or restrictive intervention or rights limitation as you would document any others. Include the reason why it's justified, what your plan is for ensuring due process and restoration of rights. So I think that's the easiest answer. I would question a little bit about bolting as a medical reason for needing one-on-one.
Yeah, it's not medical until the car hits them. And sorry, that sounds trite, but what we mean is that it's a behavior. The medical comes in if they get hurt, yeah, but it's really a behavioral reason for bolting. So the justifications, if it's a medical reason, should come from the medical professional. as here the seizures, they need to be monitored at all times. Now, is it possible that the monitoring could be done by a service animal? Is it possible that the monitoring could be done electronically? All these things would be less restrictive and give the person a more freer life. So those are things that we would want to consider. Okay, Lucas, rest your voice. I'll take over. Unless there are more questions. I do not see.
Hi, this is Rita. Yeah, there were some more questions that we had in the chat box, and I'll throw them out so we can respond to them. There was a question about seatbelt supports versus mechanical restraints and how, what the differences were.
Okay, that is a really great question, and it's, as I said, not much in our world is black and white. So you have to consider, sometimes there are people that we put seatbelts on and they don't physically or mentally have the capacity to remove the seatbelt. And we're putting the seatbelt on for the same reason that any of us wear seatbelts, because you're supposed to wear them in a car for safety reasons and those kinds of things. And if it's the same thing as we would do with anyone, even though they physically can't remove it, it would not be a mechanical restraint, because it's not different than what any of the rest of us would do. Special adaptation to it to make it non-removable, except with a special key or fingerprint or any other kind of crazy thing that we might come up with. If the seatbelt is not removable because you've adapted it so the person can't remove it, then it would be a mechanical restraint.
And then we had another question in regards to, and I can answer this one. Somebody asked, they thought seclusion timeout is a prohibited practice, and yes, it is. It is also a restriction. So it's under that umbrella of a rights restriction, a prohibited practice, and something that needs to go through due process.
Well, let me correct. It's not prohibited until July 1st, 2021. It's just restricted. So I'm glad you were not using it because you thought it was prohibited, but it's not prohibited. It's just restricted, and requires a special process to use at this point in time.
And then there was another question, and I don't know the answer. This is a really good question. Is there any training program to teach direct support professionals about restrictions and reactive strategies?
We have not. This certainly could be one of the programs that you would, or one of the curricula that you could have them watch and provide discussion for them. As you can see, sometimes there are questions from the material, and you could, I recommend providing a discussion time after they watch this. It's going to be available on our website in a recorded webinar.
And then the last was a statement, and I don't know the answer. There was a question that somebody asked that indicated that the courts have indicated to them that the judge has indicated that people need to comply with the guardian's requests, such as limiting people's cigarettes. And the question was, has DMH legal counsel weighed in on this?
I don't know if the legal counsel's weighed in on it, so that's something that we can follow up on. And of course, it depends on which court and which judge and what they said, what they believe. But I would have to say that's something that we'll have to get back to you on. It's always up to the provider whether they can meet the guardian's requests.
And that's all the questions we have now that I can see.
Okay, so I just noticed that some people are writing questions in the Q&A and some people in the chat box. We typically monitor the chat box. So if you if you want to use the chat box for questions, that would be the easiest way for us. It's hard for us to monitor both boxes. So I'll go through some of those Q&A questions and then just ask you to use the chat box from now on. The slideshow will be available later for reference. There's a recording. Reactive strategy threshold we're about to get to. And Wendy, I'm not sure what you mean by in regards to waiver funding. So in the chat box, if you could elaborate on that, we'll answer that next. So this is great. I love all these questions. I hope that they don't annoy you as a participant because hopefully they show you that everything needs context. As a behavior analyst, context is everything. And so we can only consider something, we really only consider behavior in context alone is not very meaningful. So neither is information. All right, so the long-awaited reactive strategy threshold. If you're familiar with Directive 4.300, you are familiar with the reactive strategy threshold because it's the same as it was in that directive. This is not new. This was in place previously for many years, and now it's a rule. Reactive strategy threshold is use of reactive strategies that also meet the definition of restrictive. So we're not talking about strategies that are just reactive, like stay close hot or something like that. Yes, thank you, Heidi. Rita, I think your microphone's not on mute and it's causing some feedback. If you could, thank you. So reactive strategies that are also restrictive. So if you think about the Venn diagram, both of those circles interact, and that point in the middle, those that are also restrictive. And the use of 5 or more of those within a 1 month period of time, 5 or more reactive and restrictive within a 1 month period of time means that you've met the threshold for that individual. And so what that means is that the service provider or support team, really, because all of the team are service providers, must have processes to review situations that result in the use of reactive and restrictive strategies. And they have to meet and discuss the triggers and any preventive strategies that should have or could be used in the future. They need to develop new or revised proactive strategies to prevent the situation. And if they continue to meet the threshold for 3 consecutive quarters, so that would be 3 times 4 months, no, 3 times 3 months, so that would be 9 months consecutive of meeting the threshold. Sorry, I had to do math there while I was running my mouth. That's very hard for me. Then that requires a referral to the Behavior Support Review Committee. So these are all the same things that were in the directive previously and now our rule. So 5 or more reactive and restrictive strategies. The team has to have a process to review, identify triggers and preventative strategies, develop new or revised proactive strategies to prevent the situation. And if this happens for 3 consecutive quarters, refer it to the Behavior Support Review Committee. So you might be wondering, well, how the heck am I supposed to know if we've met that threshold? Are you going to tell me? Is QE going to write me a note? And the answer to that is no. In the contract and in the waiver, providers are required to monitor take data on the positive strategies they're implementing and on the reactive strategies they're implementing, especially if they're reactive and restrictive. And so this is the provider's data system that probably gets reported in the monthly report to the support coordinator. So now the support coordinator can help in that monitoring. Should identify for them when they've met that threshold because providers are required to monitor those kinds of things. Now, that's not to say that we might not see this through support coordinator monitoring or L&C and PR reviews, but those are just check behinds. That's not to tell you when you need to use these, when you need to follow through with these processes that are to address the individual's situation and meet the person's needs. So the provider themselves, the support team, should identify those. So the team, when the team meets about a reactive restrictive strategy threshold, that's an interesting Freudian slip of the tongue. They should be having a heightened level of review. So in other words, this should not be, as I've sat in on throughout the years, many team meetings where the team goes, do we still need this? Yep. Okay, next one. Do we still need this? Yep. Okay, next one. It should not be a perfunctory review. It should be a heightened review where the team looks at, are the right strategies in place? Are these strategies being used correctly and consistently? Could there be a medical problem causing this? I've seen a lot of situations where constipation and impaction or sinus infections or abscessed teeth have caused a variety of serious self-injurious behavior. And when those things got taken care of, there was no more self-injurious behavior. So we should always look at, could there be a medical problem? Are there environmental changes that could prevent the episodes? Could we let them sleep later? Could we change when they have to do the things they don't like to do? Those kinds of things. Could we move their room further away from where staff hang out at night? Could staff be quieter at night? All of those kinds of things. Do we need some other service to assist us in figuring out how to address the situation? Could we improve the quality of life in the individual, for the individual? What can be changed in the plan and the strategies to make it less likely that we'll need reactive strategies in the future? So that's a heightened level of review, some example questions that the team might ask. And you might also consider the need for functional assessment or for behavioral services. And here's a hint, you don't have to wait for the threshold to make this consideration. So you can do this earlier. If you find yourself needing extra help, you can do the heightened review earlier, you can do the request for behavioral services earlier. So here is a polling question. What's the purpose of the team meeting when the threshold is reached? Choose all that apply. A few more seconds. All right. So the polls ended, and I'm going to get to see the responses, and here they are. Most of you chose all of the above, and I congratulate you on that correct answer. All of those things are things that the team should do when they meet following a reactive strategy, threshold. So they should review the problems and the use of the reactive strategies. Were they used correctly? Could something else have been done? They should review the crisis safety plan. They should see if they need a crisis safety plan. The answer is yes, you need a safety crisis plan if you have reached the reactive strategy threshold. They should find other ways to prevent and address the problem, and they should prevent further escalation and possible liability because they didn't respond to the reactive strategy threshold. So all of those things are true. All right, so here is a schematic, a little diagram. Sometimes people like these to help them to understand text. Text doesn't make as much sense as a picture. And so these are the actions that are specified for service providers when reactive restrictive strategies are being used. So the first thing in the light blue box says everyone is supposed to be implementing and monitoring positive proactive strategies and developing a process to review reactive strategy used. That's just everyone, all providers, for all people should have that already in place. And they should always be trying to improve those because you can never be good enough in being positive and proactive. And so then you might go through it. Do you need a reactive strategies for individual? If you do, you need a crisis safety plan or safety crisis plan. Might you have to physically intervene? If you do, you need physical restraint training. If the reactive strategies are restrictive and reactive, then you need to keep track of those so that when you meet the threshold, you have that heightened level of review. And if they meet that for 3 consecutive quarters, you refer them to Behavioral Support Review Committee and Behavioral Services. So that's a little schematic there. And of course, in the light red box, it says don't use prohibited procedures. Okay, so remember the reactive strategy threshold is applied to reactive strategies that also meet the definition of restrictive, and it's the use of 5 or more in a 1-month period. If the threshold is reached for 3 consecutive quarters, you should refer to the Behavior Support Review Committee for some extra consultation. So here's a polling question. Who tracks when a provider meets the threshold for a person? A few more seconds. Okay, so who tracks when a provider meets the threshold for a person? You can see that this is a very important point to make, and it is C. So most of you chose C. That's awesome. So please keep in mind that the provider who's implementing those restrictive and reactive strategies is the one who's tracking. The support coordinator should be getting that information so they can help to monitor that, but no one else is really going to know. So it's the provider. The correct answer is the provider who's implementing that. Okay. So just like I said before, don't wait to meet the reactive strategies threshold to do something. When you find you're using lots of reactive and restrictive, several reactive and restrictive strategies, or even one restrictive strategy, you probably want to consider what you could do instead and do as much as you can to prevent it. So some things that you might do even before reactive strategies or restrictive interventions are used is that you might get certified in a division-approved crisis management system, especially if the needs if needs are indicated in the individual's history, or it's identified that they're likely to escalate to a point of needing physical intervention, it's really, really unfair and dangerous to use the police as your reactive strategy or your restrictive strategy. We're supposed to be able to meet the individual's needs in most situations, and we should only be calling the police in situations that we would call the police for any other citizen. So those are things that we need to think about. The provider should collect and regularly review data to guide decision making, and that data should include our staff doing what they're supposed to do, as well as is it working. So data on the behavior and data on is it being used correctly. And the provider develops a process to review usage of reactive and restrictive strategies, which should include documenting that this was reviewed. And you could put that on your relevant incident report as a follow-up information. So that's even before you meet it. And I would say that when one reactive strategy is used, a safety crisis plan has to be developed so that you are not leaving your staff to try to figure out in the midst of a situation that could be a crisis what to do. People don't think well in crisis. Staff are going to implement whatever they find best at the moment, which may not be best overall. Everyone may react differently, which also may not be best overall. So do your staff a favor, develop a safety crisis plan, and they can be part of that development, as can the individual. When one reactive strategy is used, the support coordinator can document the need for a safety crisis plan, should document the need for a safety crisis plan in the ISP and a goal to reduce that need. That's the support coordinator's role in the safety crisis plan, is documenting the need and the goal. Okay. And then seclusion timeout, remember, is going to be prohibited in July. And it's also not going to be allowed in Medicaid waiver funded services in July. So that's like a double prohibition there. Okay. Just a reminder, seclusion timeout is when you lock someone in a room or in an area and they're physically prevented from having contact with others or from leaving. So this is a little bit different than the behavioral technical definition of timeout, so that's something to pay attention to. And physically prevented could be someone standing there or the door closed, and they're alone. So that's the definition of seclusion timeout. You cannot, in any case, even if you get approval for use of seclusion timeout now, lock the door on the person unless that lock is one that requires the staff to keep holding it in order for it to stay locked. And you can call it whatever you want to, the snuggly wuggly room if you want to. It doesn't matter. If you're meeting these criteria, it's timeout. All right, so here is a polling question. Read these and determine which one of these is seclusion timeout. A few more seconds. Okay, so Poll is going to close in 2 now. All right, so which one of these is an example of seclusion timeout? Remember the definition. Most of you chose A, and I would agree because B shows that the staff remain in the room with him. So remember the definition of seclusion timeout: alone in an area or a room, physically prevented from leaving, and that physically prevented could be someone standing in front of the door. So since the staff moved him to a separate room in his home and stayed there with him, the stayed there with him made it not seclusion timeout. So those are the distinguishing characteristics of seclusion timeout. I saw a couple of questions pop up. Does it make sense to take those now? Let me look.
Yes, it does. There's a couple about seclusion timeout.
Okay. So why is seclusion timeout allowed in state psychiatric hospitals? Because state psychiatric hospitals, as opposed to state-operated habilitation centers, those are two different things. Our habilitation centers like Higginsville and Belfast are not psychiatric hospitals, have different rules and different laws. And so if you want to know what they can do, you have to look at their rules and laws. Is there a difference between, and also schools. Schools are also allowed to use it because they have different rules and laws. Is there a difference between seclusion timeout and timeout? Yes. So seclusion timeout, that word seclusion is the important point there. And timeout as a behavioral strategy has a very technical definition that might not be met. In other words, seclusion timeout, as we define it legally, may not actually be timeout behaviorally. And that just gets into a whole can of worms that you probably don't want to know about, Heidi. But the thing that we need to be worried about is seclusion timeout. And Melissa asked something about manual restraints. I'm not sure what you're asking, Melissa. I'm going to need clarification on that. And Denise is asking, would it be considered seclusion timeout if staff rolled the client in a wheelchair to the room, but the client kept wheeling themselves back out and the staff kept wheeling them back in? So I would consider that physically prevented from leaving the room. So since they're physically prevented from leaving the room, and it sounds like staff are not staying in the room with the person, it would be seclusion timeout. All right, take it away, Lucas.
All righty, thank you. Let's talk about, even before we've used reactive strategies or restrictive interventions. Hopefully everyone can see this. All right, I'm now the presenter. Fantastic. So one of the things that must be true for all providers who have a contract to provide waiver services in our system is that staff are trained and actually use a division-approved PBS curriculum. So this is more than just they sat in front of a screen and watched some YouTube videos and then checked off a couple marks on a page. This is actual training with skills that they practice and are actually doing them with the people that they support consistently. So that's the first step. And this positive approach, whatever is being used by the provider, needs to be documented in the person's ISP. And again, actually implemented, so it actually has to be done. That's a key thing that we've mentioned several times throughout this, is it's not enough just to train staff, and it's not enough just to document that this is the plan. You actually have to do it. And along with actually have to do it means you got to have a way to determine if it's not happening. And then you actually have to figure out what the person needs, which is, again, a requirement for any service in the DD system. You have to figure out what does the person needs, what does the person need, and then what supports meet those needs. Again, if a person has a history of dangerous behavior or the capacity to engage in dangerous behavior in a history, then they need a safety crisis plan. again, if it's happened before, or it's likely that it will happen, you need to plan for it and address those needs. So you need a safety crisis plan. And providers, service coordinators, teams will take advantage of in-house review committees that they might have, such as a due process committee or behavior support review committee, and also outside of the organization review committees, such as the due process committee and the behavior support review committee that's operated by the division and the regional offices. What are the actions specific for support coordinators when it comes to this? So when the planning team gets together for the ISP planning meeting, the service coordinator is the one that kind of owns the ISP document. So they're the ones that kind of scribes it, puts it together, that really indicates all of those positive, proactive, and preventative strategies that are in place to support and promote a person's quality of life. And then they're also responsible for getting the services that are that meet the needs that have been identified, and then documenting all of these needs, specifically those that require the use of reactive strategies, what will be done in response to those things, and then following up with those periodic reviews of ISP services and the use of reactive strategies, which again are supported by the monthly summaries that the providers are filling out in terms of kind of what they're doing with their service, both proactive and reactive. And also the ISP or the service coordinator is responsible for documenting that what's happening or what's in place in the plan is the least intrusive set of strategies that are likely to be successful. So if things are happening that are restrictive, there's some evidence that would support that less intrusive and less restrictive interventions have been tried and they haven't worked, or that they wouldn't ensure the safety of the person. So the situation's so severe that less intrusive or restrictive interventions don't make sense for that context. So that has to be part of the justification for the use of the restrictive intervention. They also have to get the informed consent from the legal guardian and the informed assent from the individual, if the individual has a guardian, for the use of any specified reactive strategy. So what that means is that guardians have to legally say, yes, I consent to you doing this, but the individual who has the guardian really needs to assent or agree, or at the very minimum, understand what will happen to them or what is happening to them or what supports are in place for them. One of the things that is true with any situation is if people understand what's happening to them and they have some say in how it goes, things tend to go better. And that's incredibly important for safety crisis plans. Sometimes people want to meet in secret away from the individual to plan out kind of the safety crisis plan so that the person doesn't know what to expect, because if they know what to expect, they can get around it. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend the planning team, including the person, talk about what are the things that staff can do to support the person to prevent the chance that something bad happens, to respond in a way that's most likely to bring about a successful resolution to the situation. And the person should have input, and they should know what to expect and what they can expect in terms of support, and also what they can expect in terms of staff's response. And then also support coordinators should be regularly assessing the needs of the person and helping lead the effort to make changes if strategies that are in the ISP or the safety crisis plan or both aren't effective, or if you're frequently having to use them. So an example of one needing to make changes is if you're having to use your strategies in your safety crisis plan for crisis behavior, so the kind of the highest level response over and over and over again, then you probably need to sit down and look at what are your earlier strategies, your preventative strategies, to see what you can do differently to minimize getting to that crisis situation. Part of the service coordinator's responsibility when it comes to quality assurance is making sure that the service providers, the people that are hired to provide the service to the person, can actually meet that person's needs. And this includes things like physical crisis management. In the same way that you wouldn't take somebody to a doctor that specializes in podiatry when the person needs medical help for their back, you shouldn't take somebody to a residential provider that doesn't have the skills and the training and the qualifications to support somebody with high behavioral needs. Another thing that support coordinators do is monitor the implementation of the ISP, so making sure that all of those strategies that are used to meet the objectives and goals in the ISP are actually being done as they're intended to be done, and things are getting better. And if things aren't getting better, then leading the charge again to make revisions. And this includes things like the safety crisis plan and the behavior support plan. So even though the service coordinator is not writing a behavior support plan, they do have stake in making sure that if there is a behavior support plan, that it's actually being carried out as intended, and then how that's going, what the effect of that treatment is. Are things getting better or are they getting worse? Making sure that the individual is afforded all of their due process guarantees when it comes to what their rights are and what rights limitations or modifications might be in place. Making sure that no prohibited strategies are used. And then making sure that if they see the threshold is reached, that the planning team actually meets and reviews and does the follow-along process. And when reactive strategies are utilized, part of the service coordinator's job for quality assurance is to make sure that whatever is done will cause no harm to the person, and document what assessment was done to kind of determine that the reactive strategy that's used will not cause harm. So again, one prohibited practice is that whatever we do shouldn't exacerbate a known medical problem. So this is where some of that comes in. When it comes to the regional office that supports providers and service coordinators, some of their responsibilities are to provide ongoing training and consultation to promote that positive, least restrictive strategies are actually happening. This could include trainings on the person-centered approach. We offer tools of choice training, which is a division-approved PBS curriculum that is competency-based, that is a set of skills that can help build relationships and improve quality of life. We also offer the Tiered Supports Network, which is a system of consultation and supports for providers to help do things like make sure they have that system of tracking in place that Dr. Rogers talked about in terms of using positive and reactive strategies to coach and make sure that things are actually happening in the home. So how do you supervise and ensure things are happening as intended? All of those sorts of pieces of making sure services are effective and happening as intended are part of the services that Tiered Supports offers. If you are interested in tools of choice or tiered supports, you can contact your local agency tiered support consultant at your regional office, and they can get you more information about that and can meet with you if that seems interesting to you. We highly recommend it. It's extremely effective. The other thing that the regional office does is have several committees that do kind of a look behind or function to make sure that things are happening as intended, or if something, if there are challenges, that there's some sort of follow-up to see how things can improve going forward. One of those is the Behavior Support Review Committee. The other one is the Due Process Review Committee. Again, with Due Process Review Committee, it's not the place that due process happens. It's the committee that is the look behind to ensure that due process has happened. Just want to make sure people are aware of that. And it makes sure, the regional office also makes sure that if people are need to get help from one of these committees, that they are identified and referred to meeting with one of the committees. The regional office also will consult with the area behavior analyst for the region, as well as the targeted risk prevention coordinator for the state, to make sure that providers and service coordinators and individual teams are being supported in the way that they need. And then the regional offices also monitor through other established processes like licensure and certification, PR, and quality enhancement. All right, so question again, And who writes the safety crisis plan? We'll take just a minute to answer this, and then we will discuss. Okay, we have a few more seconds. All right, the poll's ended. We will see what the answers hold. Most people, about half of you, answered that C, the support team, with the emphasis on the provider who will implement it, is the person responsible for writing the safety crisis plan. That is the correct answer. So when it comes to who is actually responsible for coming up with the plan, the whole team is, and as it's an implementation plan of strategies, the provider should be leading that charge unless there are behavioral services in place. And the support coordinator's responsibility then is to document in the ISP that there's a need identified for having a safety crisis plan and an objective related to it. I'm glad that only one person, I wish it would have been 0 people, but one person identified that the regional office behavior team was responsible for writing a safety crisis plan. That is not something that they do. And it is also not true that a safety crisis plan must be developed by a licensed provider. It can be developed by anybody. It should be developed as part of a team process. If there are behavior services, then as we'll see in a second, it becomes part of the behavior support plan, but it's still the team's responsibility to help collaborate on the safety crisis plan. Okay, Dr. Rogers, I'm handing it over to you, and I think there's a couple questions about staffing, and I think that's it.
Okay. So Amanda asks, if we have a consumer has become more manic or agitated, can the company or the agency increase staffing for a short term without billing Medicaid? And is that still considered a restrictive strategy? And so you might have noticed in the definition that who pays for it is not part of the definition, and this rule is not just applicable to Medicaid waiver funded services. So it's anybody serving anyone who has an open episode of care with the Division of Developmental Disabilities. That's who's covered by this rule. And so I would say it's restrictive, yes, because it's different than what you're doing with everybody else. And remember, restrictive doesn't mean prohibited. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you do it, making sure that it's the least restrictive, that you have other positive things in place, that you have it time limited, that you are monitoring the need and the effectiveness, all the things that are required when you put a restriction in place. That just makes sense, because you don't want to use it longer than is necessary. You want to make sure that what you're doing isn't making things worse, all those kinds of things. So none of these requirements are to make things more difficult for anyone. They're really to try to make sure that we're doing what's absolutely effective and necessary. So hopefully that answers the question. If I can get my cursor over, there we go. All right, so the responsibilities of the area behavior analyst, so this is Rita and Lucas and Melantha at this time. Their responsibilities are to review all of the data that we have access to for high-risk outcomes. So these are outcomes that include hospitalization or ER use, use of multiple psychotropic medications, use of enhanced staffing hours, law enforcement, physical altercation, incident reports, and did I forget anything, Lucas? I think I got everything.
Did you capture transitions?
Oh, right. And transitions from one provider to another. Those are all considered high-risk outcomes, and we actually have data confirming that moving is a high-risk outcome for almost everyone. So they look at all that data and they compile who's having those outcomes, how often, and develop a high-risk list, which kind of prioritizes who needs more assistance to have better outcomes in their life. And then they schedule the Behavior Support Review Committee based on the high-risk criteria for that month or quarter. And in the past, this was an invitation, but now it's a requirement if you get invited that the team attend the Behavior Support Review Committee. So from now on, the invitation is actually a schedule of when you will come. And the area behavior analyst also reviews incident reports and other information that might tell us about the use of prohibited procedures. And if they find those, then we implement a special review process that's designed to assist the planning team to utilize more appropriate strategies and less restrictive strategies. So eventually those prohibited strategies, sooner rather than later, are discontinued for more appropriate strategies after this review process, and that's what we will assist the provider to do. The area behavior analyst chairs the Behavior Support Review Committee. They document the meeting and they follow up with each planning team after the review to see that the recommendations are followed. And they meet the timelines that are identified in the rule. So those are the responsibilities of the area behavior analyst. And see what the next slide says. Okay. Just a note for everyone to be aware that behavior analysts, ABAs, applied behavior analysts, have a role in medications, especially psychotropic medications, but it could be in any medications that affect the person's behaviors. Sometimes, especially in the case of elderly people and people with dementia, antibiotics can affect the person's behavior. And so if it's likely to affect the behavior, it's the role of the behavior analyst who's involved in the case to monitor and analyze the effect of that medication. This is in our ethical and compliance code on treatment and intervention efficacy. And so we should be finding out as best as we can from the prescriber what behaviors or symptoms the medication should be targeting. And we should be helping that prescriber to evaluate if those medications are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the rule states that target behaviors related to symptoms for which psychotropic medications are prescribed are addressed in the behavior support plan. So we're actually looking at psychotropic medications and we're giving that prescriber information back about the effects of those medications on that target behavior. That is our requirement in our ethical code and our requirement now in rule. Okay. I'm lost where I'm at. Oh, I'm going through 44. Okay. Sorry, got lost about where I was at. So now the behavior support plan. So for those of you who aren't behavior analysts, here's why you want to know this. You want to be sure you're getting what you're paying for, and your tax dollars are paying for these services, so you are paying for these services. And for behavior analysts, sometimes our graduate programs weren't very thorough in preparing us to write behavior support plans or functional assessment, and so these might help to guide you in what, and at least it will inform you what's expected in the state of Missouri when serving people with developmental disabilities. And one thing of note, that asterisk there says behavior support plans are only valid and able to be used when there are ongoing behavioral services. So if you have a prescription and you stop seeing that doctor and that prescription expires, then you can't continue to fill that prescription. The same kind of idea with a behavior support plan. Behavior support plans have to be monitored by licensed providers, and if they're not monitored by the licensed provider, they cannot be implemented. So you can't just write a plan for the rest of the person's life and not have behavioral services. All right, so hopefully that clarifies some things. When there is a behavior support plan and behavioral services, then the responsibility of the support coordinator is to be sure that there is an addendum to the ISP, or that the ISP has a service need identified and a goal for those behavioral services. So they write the ISP, they're responsible for making sure there's a need identified in the ISP and the goal. And of course, everybody who's on the team needs to be aware of what's in the ISP. They submit the UR request for services as designed by the behavioral professional. So they should ask the behavioral professional what's required and then submit the UR request. And they should submit that UR request ASAP, especially if it's an urgent situation. It should not sit around for long periods of time. Sometimes we hear that UR takes a long time, and when we go back and investigate, it's because support coordination hasn't actually submitted the request yet. So if you don't submit the request, it's really hard for UR to review it. The support coordinator should monitor to see if services are being provided, and if the plan is being implemented, and if it's working. You should be able to see with your own little eye that the behavior plan is working. And if you can't, then that's something to say, hey, this doesn't seem to be working, just as you would with any other service. And just to note, the support coordinator is not writing or rewriting the BSP into the individual support plan. The writing of the BSP is the job of the behavioral provider. Okay. The responsibilities continuing with the support coordinator are to contribute to the development of the BSP. So the other thing that's true is that behavior support plans shouldn't be developed in isolation in the mad scientist laboratory. The behavior analyst or the licensed behavioral provider should be working with the team to discuss what might work, to develop a plan that's going to work in the context that it has to be applied, and that everyone's going to be able to and willing to implement the plan. And so the support coordinator should give feedback to the behavioral support professional about the behavior plan and about whether it's being implemented with fidelity. So the responsibilities of the providers of behavioral services are to be licensed in the state of Missouri, and to be a collaborator in the individual support system. So we should be working collaboratively with everybody who's supporting the individual. We should make sure that the techniques included in the plan are based on our functional assessment of the target behaviors, and that these techniques meet the requirements for our practice law and rule, and for this rule, 9 CSR 45-3.090. I'm trying to memorize it, so I want to say it as many times as I can. So the specific elements of a behavior support plan are identified in rule now, and they must include proactive strategies, so ways to prevent the challenging behaviors, that they must be improving the quality of life and promoting desirable behaviors. So in behavioral language, promote means reinforcement. You need to see reinforcement of desirable behaviors that are both taught and just happening in the environment in the plan. And there should be a teaching plan for functionally equivalent or related behaviors that are going to replace the challenging behavior, including communication, coping, independent, and community skills, any of those that might apply to the functionally equivalent replacement behavior. And they should identify behaviors that are related to symptoms for which the psychotropic medications were prescribed, so that we're getting data on those psychotropic medications. Okay, so true or false, this is a quick one, so let's just give it 30 seconds. Heike, if you can make that quick change. VSPs are good for life. True or false? There you go. Answer that in the polling place there. Heike, you are so good. You actually did limit it to 30 seconds. You go, girl. All right, VSPs are good for life. That is false. And almost everybody put false. Yay. Not only are they not good for life, they have to have behavioral services involved, but they should be ever changing. They should not be the same for a year. Because if they're working, you're working towards more independence and better quality of life, and that should require changes. So that's an interesting perspective there. I hardly ever see plans that get changes throughout the time that they're used. And now, Lucas, you're bringing it home.
All right, so let's talk about some more specific elements of the behavior support plan. So other things that must be included in the behavior support plan is that it's got to be in a form that can actually be understood by the planning team and the people that actually will have to implement it. So this is really important. So, you know, sometimes we want to write things very technically and use a lot of behavioralese or jargon. But what we need to remember is that the people that are implementing it need to be able to understand and actually carry it out. And we typically aren't having registered behavior technicians implement these plans. We're typically having direct care staff or family caregivers implement. And so all plans and the assessment as well need to be written in a way that people can actually understand what they mean. So plain, clear, concise language. There actually has to be data collection and review. So you've got to keep taking data. So, you know, if you took some data for the assessment, that's great, but you got to keep taking data after you start providing treatment and use that to make changes as indicated. So if, as Dr. Rogers talked about, things are getting better, then that should indicate that the plan should advance to more and more goals that the person might have. So either more of a certain behavior or additional behaviors that need to be taught or added to the repertoire. And if, unfortunately, things aren't improving, then that should be used to guide revisions to the plan. So that is continued assessment to determine what was missed from the initial assessment and what changes are indicated. And also, in addition to just seeing if the behavior targeted for decrease is going down and the behavior targeted for increase is going up, we need to measure whether people are actually doing the plan. Only when we know if people are doing the plan can we say that if the behavior is going up that we want and the behavior that we don't want is going down is because of our plan. So if we don't know whether staff or caregivers or RBTs are actually implementing the plan, we really don't know if our plan is successful, even if the behavior seems to be improving. And finally, we don't just take this data and keep it in a drawer, we actually have to share it with the team. And that includes the person's doctor. Specifically, if the person is taking psychotropic medications, which almost all of our people are, we're communicating back to those physicians how treatment is going, and if they're taking psychotropics, how the person's medication and the symptoms for which they are prescribed relate to the person's behavioral progress. And this needs to happen frequently, at least monthly to the team. And hopefully not just an email with some documentation, but an actual meeting to talk about what's going on. Dr. Rogers mentioned that one of the expectations is that behavior providers collaborate with teams. That's part of the collaboration process, is having team meetings. And then the plan also should include specific strategies to generalize and maintain the progress. So behavior services aren't meant to be a forever service. It's meant to be a short-term treatment service that addresses the reasons for challenging behavior and teaches a person behaviors that can replace that challenging behavior, and then also rearranges the environment to support desirable behavior that has been taught and just in general. And the goal is that once the plan is no longer in place, that success continues, not just where the plan was implemented, but in other places as well. So if the person is successful in their home, the idea would be that they would continue to be successful in their home and also be able to go to different places that they haven't been before and continue to be successful. So that's the goal of a BSP, and there should be some specific thinking around it. We shouldn't be doing what Stokes and Bayer call the hope and pray approach. We should actually have a plan on what we're going to do when supports are no longer in place. The plan should include a safety crisis plan. So if the reason for behavior services is to address the challenging behavior that meets that criteria for when a safety crisis plan needs to be in place, there has to be a safety crisis plan, and that should be incorporated into the behavior support plan. If for some reason you are just there to teach skills, maybe you're doing some early intervention and you're just working on early language acquisition, maybe you don't need a safety crisis plan. But for most of the people in the DD system, if behavior services have been called, they probably also meet that requirement for having to have a safety crisis plan. Behavior service providers, as the behavioral experts, should be guiding that process and should be incorporating the safety crisis plan into the behavior support plan. If there's physical restraint or timeout included, there needs to be specific criteria and procedures on how to actually use it. So what are the criteria for when it's used? What are the procedures to actually do it? And then how are you going to make sure that people are doing it correctly, that the person that is experiencing that intervention stays healthy and alive? And how are you going to monitor their health for the next hour, at least every 15 minutes? So what are you going to do to make sure that you know that staff are trained and know exactly when to carry out the procedure, how to carry out the procedure correctly, and then how to assess safety and health for at least an hour afterwards? And then what's your system to make sure all of that happens as it's supposed to be? There needs to be a justification that whatever interventions that are indicated in the behavior support plan are least restrictive and the most likely to be effective based on both the individual context and what we know to be best practice from our literature, and that there is a plan for training implementers, whether that's staff or caregivers, to competency on how to do the plan. So there's got to be some forethought how you're going to teach people to implement this plan so that they can carry it out as it's intended and the person can get the service that you've identified in the plan. Let me make sure there's no questions related to that before I go on to BSRC. I don't see one. Okay, so let's talk about the Behavior Support Review Committee here at the end. The Behavior Support Review Committee has been around in one shape or another since about the middle of 2016. So it's been almost 4 years now. It's been in place. It's been statewide since January of 2017. It was in 3 regional areas. So there was a Central Behavior Support Review Committee, an Eastern and a Western Behavior Support Review Committee. Now it's been consolidated to a statewide committee that meets across the state virtually. And the purpose of the committee is to provide helpful consultation to teams who support challenging individuals. It's made up of members from the community that practice behavior services, and it's chaired, as Dr. Rogers mentioned earlier, by one of the area behavior analysts. We prioritize individuals who are meeting highest on our risk indicators and risk outcomes that we look at, and we target those individuals for what used to be an invitation and now is kind of a request to come. So we're prioritizing that list based on who has the greatest need in the state and we're trying to make sure that each region has kind of reasonable access to it so that we're meeting needs and also making sure we're covering the state. And in addition to that, so those are the kind of things that we're doing to find the people that need the most help and make sure they get help, but you can also request to come. And in the same way, as Dr. Rogers mentioned, that you shouldn't wait till you hit the threshold to implement that comprehensive review process, you shouldn't wait till you get a letter from one of the area behavior analysts that you need to come to the Behavior Support Review Committee before you consider the Behavior Support Review Committee as a resource to get some help. So if you're stuck, if you are a team that has a person who exhibits significantly challenging behavior and things aren't getting better, you can ask to come to the committee and get reviewed. If you're a behavior analyst that has a really tough case and you don't know what to do with the situation, you can ask and come and get some help from the committee. So again, it's a consultative, constructive group of folks that are there to help make sure that supports are best practice, least restrictive, and to offer a helpful set of eyes for challenging situations. And specifically, we're interested in making sure that those people with highest needs get reviewed. So just to clarify, we don't review every single person in the DD system who has a restrictive intervention or has had or does have reactive strategies. We're only reviewing those people that get requested to come or who refer themselves. So if you say you want to come, you can be reviewed. If we request that you come, you have to come, but we're not reviewing everybody. We're not reviewing every single person in our system with challenging behaviors, and we're not reviewing every single person in our system that has behavior services. So only those people that get a request to come because that person has met on multiple high-risk indicators and is there's a clear need that the team could use some assistance, or teams that say, I need some help and ask to get it. I'm getting a question that says, did you say we as BCBAs can bring challenging cases? Absolutely, Denise. That we would love that. We would love for any behavior provider that is stuck on a case to reach out and get some consultation from other behavior analysts in the community. So one of the things that can happen when you're out there practicing, specifically if you're on your own, is it seems really lonely because you're kind of out in a desert. There's not a lot of behavior analysts around, and sometimes it's hard to find somebody to bounce ideas off of, or maybe it's hard to find somebody that has some expertise in an area that you're not as familiar with and you could use some supervision. The Behavior Support Review Committee is the perfect place to come and get that help, because you're going to get access to, now with the current format, you're going to get access to behavior analysts that practice across the entire state of Missouri that have very diverse expertise and experiences, can provide mentorship to newer analysts. It can be a great place to kind of start getting tapped into the local group of behavioral providers. It's a good place to bounce ideas off. It's a good place to get some suggestions when you're really stuck. So yes, absolutely, Denise. If you have a challenging case, please ask to come and we would be happy to provide some help. I don't see any other questions. It says, how are all behavior therapists who are waiver providers trained on all of the specific DMH-DD expectations and requirements? You want to answer that one, Dr. Rogers?
Well, we offer this training. The requirements are in rule and in the waiver, and we have the Behavior Review Committee where we talk about things like this, and lots of behavioral providers are participating. One of you all who finds a behavioral provider who seems to be unaware could point them in the direction of this training and actually of the area behavior analyst for more assistance. So it's pretty much just like every other provider learns about the requirements. And we're always trying to provide trainings. If you look on the website, we have a lot of trainings available to include behavioral providers. We also provide sessions at conferences when we're able, get approval to do that or request to do that. All of those kinds of ways, if you have any suggestions for other ways that we could do it, we are open to trying to get the word out, because we certainly do want to do that.
And this is Rita Cooper. There was another question about safety crisis plans and if there was a format, and I wanted to let everyone know that there is a safety crisis plan template on the DMH website. So if you go there and type in safety crisis plan, a template will come up and you should be able to locate it.
And in addition to that template for the plan, there's a template for an assessment, so that'll help a team understand what kinds of questions to ask in order to create a workable safety crisis plan. So we also help you to assess what strategies might be used in a safety crisis plan with that template. That's available on our website for $9.99, but free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So here's a question for you all really quickly. When is it mandated that a person's services and plan be reviewed at the Behavior Support Review Committee? Is it A, B, C, D, all of them, or just C and D? We'll take about a minute to answer this question. Okay, the poll has closed. The answer to this one is F. And it looks like most of you indicated that all of the above are true. So let me just go over this really quickly. So again, the Behavior Support Review Committee is not reviewing everybody who has reactive restrictive strategies in their ISP or BSP. We're not reviewing people necessarily when the reactive strategy threshold is met. Again, we may not know unless we're kind of following up with one of the other follow-on processes that the division utilizes. We are reviewing people that have solution timeout being used or in their plan. And there's a caveat with that one that I'll say in a second. And we are reviewing plans when we request to review them because a person has met high-risk criteria and is at urgent need for review. So those are the C and D are the only two reasons when Behavior Support Review Committee review would be mandated. The other ones may be reasons why it would be a good idea to come to the committee, but they're not reasons that would mandate a review by the Behavior Support Committee. Now, the caveat with C is even right now with exclusion timeout being an approvable procedure, it can only be used once it's been approved, and part of that approval process is to be reviewed by the Behavior Support Review Committee and also reviewed and approved by Dr. Rogers as the Chief Behavior Analyst. And if exclusion timeout is being used without that pre-approval, it is a prohibited practice at that point. And then any other prohibited practice that happens, those situations would also have to come and be reviewed at the Behavior Support Review Committee as part of the follow-up process that happens when prohibited practices occur. And then again, we've already talked about when a chairperson, one of the area behavior analysts, notices that an individual has met on many of those high-risk criteria that we look at and is at urgent need, we will request somebody be reviewed. Okay, so that was, we have some time for some questions, and I see that there's one in the chat about exclusion timeout. So I'll read it out and I will give folks a chance to respond. So for exclusion timeout, if there is no door on the room, but exiting is prohibited by physical blocking due to unsafe behaviors, and the person is never alone, would that qualify as exclusion timeout? So I would say that based on the definition, if the staff are standing outside of the room and the person is inside their room, even if there's no door, and if every time they try to come out, the staff puts them back in the room alone in their room, then yeah, that sounds like it probably meets the definition of exclusion timeout.
And Lucas, I would concur with you.
So I would concur also, but what if the staff is inside the room, so not just at the door? Is that restrictive? So this is a trick question. Is that restrictive? So if they're inside the room, it's not seclusion timeout, but is it restrictive? What do you guys think? Chat box, anybody want to jump in on that one? I don't see anyone jumping in. I would tell you that it is restrictive. So if you're forcing someone to stay in the room with you, you are implementing a restrictive strategy. I might not necessarily recommend that strategy because nobody forces me to stay in rooms. Well, all right, you guys are forcing me to stay in this room, but I'm getting paid to do it, so it's probably not considered force. So you need to consider, this isn't a way to get around a restriction on your behavior to not use seclusion timeout, because you're still being restrictive, and the person could then, behavior could escalate. They could beat the crap out of the person in the room. There's a lot of stuff that could happen. So just because the staff are in the room doesn't make it okay, or doesn't make it a good idea. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so whether or not there's a door on the room is not the deciding factor on whether it's exclusion timeout. You could hypothetical it to death. Like, what if a person has 1 foot on the threshold and like half their toe inside the room? Is that okay? And it would have to be a case-by-case examination. At that point, it's hard to just proclaim what is or isn't. I mean, we could even, I don't want to draw a map about a room, but it's definitely a rights limitation, and you're implementing a rights restriction. It's a restrictive intervention, and it's maybe permissible, but you should be doing other things in addition to that, including having a safety crisis plan, examining whether or not that's actually working or making things worse, whether or not you need behavior services, what other things can you be doing, what does the rest of the day look like. All those things should be happening as well. We had another question about, can an agency take away alone time from an individual if they are at risk for safety reasons? The safety crisis plan need to be completed in this case. The answer to the question is rights can be limited. Rights can be limited for people in our services, so long as it's within what can be limited. So there's an extent to how you can limit people's rights, and that you follow the due process requirements, which ensures that you stay within the limits of how rights can be limited. You make sure you do it for a good reason. You have a plan in place for how you're actually going to do it, take data on it, have a plan for not needing it. So yeah, agencies can limit a person's alone time for safety reasons. That could be justified. And if they're limiting alone time for safety reasons in response to some unsafe situation that has happened, then yeah, they would have to have a safety crisis plan because they've done something reactive and restrictive. And if they're doing it just preemptively because the person has a history, you should still have a safety crisis plan, because one of the things that is true is that if the person's at risk at hurting themselves, then what should staff be doing to try to prevent that from happening? How should they recognize the signs that a person's likely to hurt themselves? And if they try to hurt themselves, what should staff do to safely address that happening? So really what a safety crisis plan does is just give staff something to work with, some steps that they can take to try to help a situation.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why people are worried about having safety crisis plans. Do you have a plan for how to get out of the building if it's burning? It doesn't mean that you set the building on fire. It means that you know where the exits are. So it's just a good idea. It's not a problem. It's not a doesn't cost you anything. It probably costs you less.
Also,
Go ahead.
Can I add one more thing about safety crisis plan? So sometimes people say, well, that's a rights limitation to have a safety crisis plan. And it certainly could be true that there are restrictive interventions that are part of a safety crisis plan, but a safety crisis plan in and of itself is not a restrictive intervention and actually promotes least restrictive practice for a person because you've pre-planned what you're going to do to try to prevent challenging situations from occurring and what you're going to do that the minimal that you can do to safely resolve a situation. So I would say that a safety crisis plan is least restrictive, even though it might have some restrictive pieces.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions that we haven't covered.
There was one or two that we missed way back, and I was trying to get in there to let you guys know. So one was, how do we limit rights restrictions when we're dealing with an individual who has sexualized behaviors and they indicated pedophile? So I wasn't really sure what the individual was trying to get at. So if they could kind of chat in the chat box, what do you mean by that? That would be helpful too.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the behavior is, you do the same things for everybody when you have to limit rights. And so you have to go through the due process. You have to have not just a plan, the plan of, when they stop doing this, we'll stop the rights restriction. That's not a plan. So the plan is teaching them other appropriate ways to engage in sexual behaviors, teaching them inappropriate things, going to therapy, all those kinds of things that make it more likely that they don't have those problems. And so make it more likely that you'll be able to stop limiting their rights. So that's what we mean by plan. We don't just mean a goal that says I'm going to never do this again. We mean you're actually doing something to make it likely that they'll never do it again.
And another question that we had was if there is one-to-one staffing for 12 hours a day for a crisis, do we need a safety crisis plan? And my response is it's enhanced staffing. It's a crisis. You need a safety crisis plan.
So my response is, what the heck are staff supposed to do for 12 hours a day if they don't have a plan? Again, it's just respectful to the person and to your staff to help them understand what they should do to prevent the situation and make crisis less likely and what to do if crisis occurs. So I'm again baffled by the aversion to safety crisis plans.
And we had a comment by Wendy. Does this include seat belts even applied to a child? Do you mean, could you clarify that?
I can't tell if you're typing, Wendy, but let me take a stab at it. So theoretically, in our society, even children have rights. But we use child safety seats that children can't get themselves out of. And we generally don't teach them to get themselves out until they are under instructional control somewhat. So children are a little bit of a different case. I would say if the seatbelt is adapted so the child cannot get out of it themselves. In other words, if you do something different than what you would do for any other child, it would be problematic. So that's, again, not black and white. You have to consider all of the rights restriction questions and consider if it's different than what you would do for anybody else. Okay, we've got a few more minutes. If there's any other questions, we'll be happy to entertain them. I don't know if we're entertaining, but they're entertaining us. So we'll give you a few more minutes, and if not, and you need to go, please feel free to sign off, and this will be available on our website, and we'll also use your questions to develop an FAQ. And thank you for your time today.